Hello, my name's Adrian Goldberg and welcome to Byline Radio, or if you're listening on Catch Up, to the Byline Times podcast. This time, the latest from Ukraine with Zarina Zabrisky, who'll be telling us about Russia's scorched earth policy and the routine targeting of civilians. Zarina, who you can read in Byline Times and the Euromaidan News, is normally based in Odessa, but she's been on a fact-finding mission to Bucha, the site of a notorious massacre, plus Irpin and Hostomel. First, though, a quick reminder that Byline Radio and the Byline Times podcast are funded by subscribers to the Byline Times, our wonderful monthly newspaper, edited by Hardeep Matharu. We are not bankrolled by oligarchs or non-doms. We can report without fear or favour and hold the rich and the powerful to account, which is needed now more than ever. Our funding comes from ordinary subscribers, so do subscribe if you can to the Byline Times. You get more details at our newsbreaking website, bylinetimes.com. That's at bylinetimes.com. And if you have already subscribed, thank you. Well, Zarina Zabrisky, welcome back. It's a couple of weeks since we last spoke, and you've been on a pretty harrowing journey ever since. Just tell me where you've been and what you've seen.
Adrian, I feel like I've been to hell with the deputy mayor of Bucha for my Virgil. You know, I know it might sound like quite a literary reference, but that's not what I mean. It actually, the only relevant word I can think of when I look back, that is to say, this place, the suburbs of Kyiv, are recovering now actively. So I want to put it in right away, because one of the strongest messages I got from this trip is that people in the Kyiv suburbs that were hit by the Russian invasion, by the atrocities, do not want to live in a place of tragedy, I am told. They want to live in a beautiful, green, thriving place, which it certainly was before the 24th of February. To be more geographical about it, I went to several little towns that are all located close to each other. Just to give you an idea, it's about 10 minutes ride from the outskirts of Kyiv. So I arrived by train, which was a wonderful, wonderful train, the most comfortable one I've ever been on, the night train from Odessa to Kyiv. It takes one night, it's air conditioned, it's beautiful. So you arrive to the railway station to Kyiv and take metro, which is beautiful here, so efficient and fast and clean, and also, of course, serves as a bomb shelter right now at this time. So I took it all the way to a place called Akademistechko, from which I deduced the little buses are circulating and would take me on a long journey to legendary Bucha. Well, lo and behold, I was there in 10 minutes. It's right by Kyiv. So Russians were that close. And that was my number one shock. And of course, you know, the whole arrival was quite dramatic, because I come out of the metro and air raid starts. And I had the work meeting, staff meeting for Euromaidan. So I was sitting outside with all the military people walking around with air raid going on, and with my phone speaking to my colleagues. And as I arrived to Hostomel, because I first arrived to Hostomel, I feel this smell of burnt, I don't know, everything. We spoke about that before. If you might remember that from my covering of the bomb sites in Odessa and Mykolaiv. There's this very distinct smell, stench, I would say. And here it's already, you know, somewhat diluted because it's been several months, but you still feel it so strong. And then you see the ruins all around you. There's a bus stop called the Mini Market and City Market, I'm sorry. And the City Market used to be quite modern architecture, something. It's like this triangle, sheep-like shape, and it is all burnt and charred and black. And the only signs that are remaining are the pet store sign, quite fancy one, and the grill and barbecue place. And it smells like something grilled and burned, but not barbecue. And there's the shattered glass is everywhere, and the bus stop is right by a ruined private house with a Ukrainian flag on it. And then from there, you walk into this surreal realm of like destroyed city, destroyed residential town. And I've been to many, as you know. We talked about that here on the Byline Time radio, in sites in Mykolaiv, in Odessa, but nothing of that scale that I have seen so far. And Hostomel was ruined. Their blocks that are just burned down, and there's just rubble. And you see children's bicycle, with three wheels, standing there completely burned. The cars with the burned and melted metal. And it is scorched earth, literally. Everything is scorched. And what makes it even more dramatic is that used to be, and still is in parts, the parts that have survived, upper middle class area. It's, what, as they used to call it in California, yuppies, right?
Yeah.
Young professional families, IT workers, and managers of businesses, PR experts, very modern. And the level of, they have a very high standard level of living. And I stayed with my teacher of Ukrainian. I now study Ukrainian. And she's a lovely young lady, and her husband. They had to flee Donetsk in 2014 and leave their apartment that they just bought. And so they had to start from nothing again. And they saved enough to buy this amazing house, very comfortable, very beautiful. And then they had to flee again in the last week of February because they already knew what Russians are like. So they just overnight, they fled and stayed in the other region of Ukraine. And when they came back, their house, just as other houses all around, were damaged. The windows were shot through. I saw these holes in the curtains, and we're talking about the place that looks like maybe like IKEA showroom, only slightly better because the furniture is better. It's so well done with so much love, and the kitchen is so well equipped, all the modern things that I haven't seen myself, like some appliances. I'm not much of a kitchen person, so of course I don't know. But I mean, it's a very modern, high-tech place, which is in places shot with the bullets. And of course, everybody is restoring like there is no tomorrow. And so that's where I stayed. And I interviewed my host, so there will be a story forthcoming in one of the publications I write for. And from there, I went to Bucha. And in Bucha, I had an appointment with the Bucha deputy mayor. And her name was Mikhailina, and she was supposed to see me at 3. And I arrived to Bucha, and of course there are more ruined places, and it's just very jarring to find these beautiful high rises, all very new. They look like it's not my phrase; somebody told me that, but they look like a monster, like a Godzilla was gnawing on the top of the buildings. That's how it looks.
And Bucha, Zarina, is the site of a horrendous massacre. Bodies of more than 1,300 people have been recovered so far, I understand, following the withdrawal or the retreat of Russian forces from the city. So in a conflict of many tragedies, of sadly, we fear more than one massacre, this was perhaps the most notorious early massacre in this war.
Yes, actually, that was for the area. According to the deputy mayor of Bucha, there were 462 bodies recovered in Bucha, in particular in this one spot where one of the spots where she took me. So I actually waited for her for 3 hours because she's just that busy, but I was very patient and I was rewarded because afterwards, after everything was closed, after the end of the day, she drove me all around Bucha in Irpin for a private tour and showed me every single place that you perhaps saw on mass media, these photographs where the tanks, the destroyed Russian tanks were cluttered in the street and where the bodies were lying down, and the churchyard where there were 2 trenches and the mass graves. And we stopped and she showed me everything. And I actually video recorded all this. So if somebody is interested, there will be your private tour of Bucha in Irpin by the deputy mayor soon on Euromaidan YouTube channel. And there is already my interview with her, one of a few on the Byline News. And there might be a piece coming out on Byline Times television as well, because she taught me so much, Adrian. She is a remarkable person herself. She's a journalist, a former journalist, I have to say, who became a politician after her husband was killed in 2014 by sniper's bullets while liberating a Levaisk in Donbass area. So Russians killed him in the beginning of this war. And this person is extremely strong. She's raising her child, and we picked up her son from childcare on the way, and he seems to be quite a strong kid as well. The childcare was across the street from a burned down building, and pretty much everything there. Not everything there, but every other building is ruined somewhat, and there are bullet holes in the fences. I put together a few little short videos that you can find on my wall or Euromaidan Press, like 1 minute, 2 minutes, just to get the idea of how it looks.
This was the most horrendous incident, and across the whole city, as I say, more than 1,300 people were believed to have been murdered. I mean, these are people who were killed in cold blood, including 31 children, civilians with their hands tied behind their backs and then shot dead. In some cases, children were raped, bodies mutilated, and so on. Is there any sense now, and I know you're keen to emphasize that the resilience of the Ukrainian people, is this city able to come back to life? Is it functioning as a city?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I mentioned in the very beginning, they don't want to live in the place of tragedy. And if you want the most typical site of Ukraine these days during the war, that would be some demolished building, or maybe even the black smoke coming from explosion in south of Ukraine that I've seen. And a couple of women standing and gardening in front of it. I have so many pictures by now. It's incredible. We drove past a hose that was placed on the lawn to water the lawn in front of the destroyed fence. And you see it everywhere. You hear the construction noises everywhere. Whatever is there to rebuild, they're rebuilding. The business is open. In Bucha, I was able to sit down in a nice cafe and have a wonderful fancy tea. I forgot the name, like White Angel tea, herbal and all that, with the most delicious croissant baked right there. People look beautiful. Ukrainian people always look after themselves. So you see this beautiful lady in a nice outfit in high heels walking by a completely destroyed building. It's a common sight, and they make a point out of it. They don't want to surrender. They want to stand strong. And I can tell you more, like I was in Borodyanka. Everybody heard about Bucha, but one of the goals for me was to cover the other places, because the administration of Bucha are very outspoken, and they speak English, they reach out, and everybody has heard about them. But there are other places around that people haven't heard about that were almost equally devastated. Say Borodyanka, and I have a little video, and I will have more, where the lady who collects the memories of people who survived the horror took me around, and she took me to the pit, Adrian, where the Ukrainians were held by the Russians and Belarusians and tortured there. It's right there. And I went inside the burned high-rise and spoke to people who lost everything there and lost their families there. And they are there running their businesses. Their children or husbands go serve in the army. And their spirit is so strong. It's really remarkable.
And where you previously were in Odessa, there have been agreements with Russia, agreements brokered by the United Nations between Ukraine and Russia to get grain out of the country. I mean, this is grain which is not only important to Ukraine economically, but is vital to the world. It helps feed the world. How has that gone?
Good question. Thank you for asking me that. I actually did quite a bit of research, and on Euromaidan Press, there's an article with my analysis of that based on my conversations with local farmers and traders and experts on the matter, where it took me a while to break it down. It's not that straightforward. There's a domestic economic situation that makes this whole process a bit more complex, because currently the prices for grain are not what they used to be, and it is not how should I put it briefly? It doesn't make sense for the farmers in Odessa and Mykolaiv region to sell their crops yet, because what they will get, the income will not cover the costs. So the majority of the farmers are actually waiting for the channels to open and for the prices to go up. And a lot of grain and a lot of crops are being stored. And they actually had the surplus and the excess of grain and crops, because the last year was very good, and the harvests were quite big, but they are not willing yet, the majority of them, to sell because the winter is coming, the war is ongoing, and besides, the trader companies, the international traders, use the force majeure and haven't paid a lot of these farmers. So they are still not paid for the previous year, and the prices are low. And as a result, they are, as business owners and people whose businesses are being devastated, actually, are not willing to part with what they have and what they have to grow under such harrowing conditions, under fire, under explosions. So it's a very complicated matter, and the local authorities are working on that. And I know that the international traders are also not doing it on purpose or to make money, but because of their cost went up so much. The insurance is sky high, and it's very hard to get. And the prices of the fuel went up. The diesel for the trucks, of course, that were delivering the crops and the grain before, are also sky high. So as you can see, it's a chain, and it's very hard to break the circle. We are hoping that the ships that started to bring the crops and the grain out of Odessa port will help to solve this problem, because when, as one of the experts I spoke to said, like what they were doing before the agreement on grain was achieved in Istanbul, basically is the equivalent of trying to export the Sahara sand with a teaspoon. And that's pretty much it. But with the capacity of the large vessels, that problem might be solved. But of course, most people do not rely on the Russians to stand by their word and to follow their agreements. And that's what Zelensky said as well, because as we know, they never do. The day after the agreement was signed, they bombed us so bad. I think we were talking after that. I think we did. That was like the worst time. Yeah, so it remains to be seen. And meanwhile, Mykolaiv is getting a really, really bad hit. I speak to my friends in Mykolaiv, and the situation there is really, really drastic. I'm afraid that Mykolaiv will be turning into new Bucha soon.
Where you are then in Kyiv and the towns and cities that you visited on the outskirts of Kyiv, like Bolodyanka. Bolodyanka is an hour, you say, from Kyiv. Bucha is much closer to Kyiv. Are these cities now free of Russian shelling? Is Kyiv itself free of Russian shelling, or is the onslaught continuing?
It's a good question. We do get here a lot of air raids, and the day before I arrived to Hostomel, it was shelled, and there was a military object that was hit, so we didn't get a lot of details on that. During my stay, we just had many air raids, and on the night here, when Nancy Pelosi's plane was about to land in Taiwan, we had the whole country air raid for about 2 hours, with people in different areas of Ukraine seeing missiles flying over their heads. Fortunately, they were shot down by our air defense, but I saw the Forbes report that Russia spent about $100 million on the missiles for just one day. That day. And fortunately, Ukrainian air defense is working better and better, so there were no hits. But I'm afraid that nobody is guaranteed to have no more shelling, because they're certainly aiming for that.
I watched a very moving BBC television programme recently about Fergal Keane, who's a very well respected war correspondent in the UK. And Fergal spoke about his experience in Burma, going back a number of years now, and his post-traumatic stress associated with that. Obviously, you're doing a great job there, Zarina, reporting on this, letting us know exactly what's happening. Are you worried about the impact on you, on how seeing some of these sites might make you feel in the long run?
Well, thank you for asking me that. Funny enough, several people asked me this question in the last 2 days. I mean, I'm a human and I'm affected. I can tell you and our listeners honestly that since I came to Kyiv after seeing Bucha and Brodyanka and Hostomel and Irpin, I was not able to speak to any person in flesh other than the lady in the grocery store across the street. I'm just sitting in the apartment here and I'm processing everything that I have with breaks to sleep and for Ukrainians lessons. But today it struck me that in fact, I might be slightly manic, and I think this is how I process. I just want to write everything and get all the footage out and uh, let everybody in the world know that it's going. And part of it is, of course, me being a journalist and a writer, but another part might be the way I'm dealing with the stress, because it's impossible to see that and to hear the air raid standing in front of the place that is completely destroyed and where the dead bodies were found en masse, and not to be in some way altered by it.
No, absolutely. And I would recommend, as well as your writing in the Euromaidan Press and your reports for Byline Times, that people do follow you at Zarina Zabrisky on Twitter. You post a lot of your videos there and pretty graphic at times, very moving at times, but it's so important as well. And I think it's inevitable, Zarina, that as time moves on, the focus on Ukraine in countries like the UK, thousands of miles away, is likely to just become less intense. But it's inevitable, but it's sad. And as far as Byline Radio and the Byline Times podcast are concerned, we're not going to stop covering it. We think it's so important. And we mustn't lose sight of this, both for the sake of the people of Ukraine, who are a proud nation and just want to speak their own language and have their own country and their own democracy. But it's also important for those of us in the West, because we know that Putin, if he was successful in Ukraine, would not stop there. That would not be the end of it. Ukraine is not his end game.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm afraid that most of the world is not really seeing the connection enough. Of course, Ukrainians are fighting for themselves, but Ukrainians are also fighting for the democracy in the world. Ukrainians are fighting for Europe and for European safety, because guess what? After Putin is done, if he is done, which I don't think he will manage, I strongly believe that he won't, but let's say somehow, by some evil miracle, he manages. He is not going to stop. He is going to proceed to Poland. He's going to proceed. And they're speaking about it openly, Adrian. And also for those who are not in the close proximity to this area, say like Europe, it will affect, and there will be impact on other continents. Of course, we'll know about the famine in Africa, but there's also what they call Putin's crisis and Putin's, what do they call it, like gas price spike in America. The whole world is connected. And another point, we have seen this last week a lot. He has unleashed, or he and the Kremlin have unleashed all the dictators, all the, what I will call quite in a literary way, evil forces, to start doing what they please. And other dictatorial regimes are now seeing that it's possible to act against the United Nations, against the what they call collective West, or whatever you call it, not necessarily West, but the democratic world. And we see China now speaking about returning territories that were captured by Japan. We see conflicts between Azerbaijan and Armenia. We see now Kosovo and Serbia the other week, which almost turned into the World War III. And the list can go on. Every day I see crisis in some country, and it will continue if he goes unpunished. And this is something that the deputy mayor of Bucha told me, that the main task for the world right now is to find a way to stop and punish the country that broke every convention, that broke the unwritten and written conventional norms of humanity. Because if it is not done, that will mean that these crimes, these atrocities are allowed, and they will continue. So there are economic, political, philosophical, existential needs to keep watching this war, and not just watching, but to support this fight in every single way. And this is why I'm here.
Absolutely. I think that many people in the UK were shocked when the former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, although he did criticise Russia's invasion of Ukraine, he said the solution to the problem is to stop arming Ukraine. But if we stop arming Ukraine in the West, that will give Putin the victory he needs and embolden him. And it seems to me that to follow that line of logic is to ignore all of the very graphic lessons of history.
Well, there's no surprise there, Adrian, with Jeremy Corbyn, because a few years ago when I was doing research, still based in America, in my home, when I was doing research of the Russia Today, RT, and Sputnik, which are the major Kremlin mass media outlets funded by the Kremlin, I found an interview with the managing director of the Russia Today is giving an interview to some Siberian university, and that's why it was very hidden. That's why it didn't get deleted from the internet. And he says that we basically made Jeremy Corbyn happen. We found him and we supported him. And whether it's completely true or not, of course, as anything that Russians say remains to be seen and checked. But the fact is that they were very friendly to each other.
One final thought, Zarina. You talk about the desire in Bucha to get justice for those who were victims of the massacre, for their families, for survivors. Is there any evidence of an international effort to bring people to justice for that massacre, or to at least collect the evidence so that perhaps later on those responsible could be brought to justice?
Yes, I believe there are multiple committees. I believe that United Nations is involved. There are certainly local efforts, and I believe they're joined by the international agencies. And there's a lot of attention to that. And Ukraine is a very digitally advanced nation, incredibly so. In fact, when I was in Davos, the digital transformation minister delivered quite a groundbreaking speech about the major software that runs in the country. There's the first and I believe the only country that has electronic passport, and everything is done via internet. And so they have the special facial recognition app where people can report the suspected Russian abuses of power, and it's very sophisticated. So there's a lot of work, there's a lot of recording of the crimes, and the victims and the eyewitnesses are being interviewed, and the cases are being recorded. And that includes the rape cases and all kind of physical abuse. So we hope that those perpetrators will be found and face tribunal.
Absolutely. Really appreciate your time, Zarina. Thank you for joining us. And as I say, you can Follow Zarina's Twitter feed at Zarina Zabrisky. That's a great place to start to watch some of her videos and see the links to some of her articles in Euromaidan News and also for Byline Times. And as I said to you last time, Zarina, just stay safe. It's really important that you report this stuff to us, but it can't be at a cost to you in the long term. It's important that you keep yourself together and keep body and mind together. So just bear that in mind.
Well, thank you so much, Adrian. And I know that we also wanted to cover a few other things that are happening internationally, because I'm not just a Ukrainian expert. I believe I became one now, but before that, I used to cover different things as well. And I'd be happy to do it. But frankly, after visiting Bucha, Borodyanka, and Hostomel and Irpin, for now, I naturally focus just on that. So maybe some other time.
No, absolutely. No, listen, I totally understand that. Honestly, that's not a problem. It's great to hear your first-hand account of what exactly has gone on. Before we finish, just a reminder that the Byline Times podcast and Byline Radio are funded by subscriptions to the Byline Times, a brilliant monthly newspaper that can report without fear or favour, and sometimes has content from the wonderful Zarina Zabrisky, amongst others, in it. So do get a subscription. Go to bylinetimes.com for more details. That's bylinetimes.com. Thanks very much indeed for listening. Thank you to Zarina, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Adrian.